All right. Thank you all for joining me for another new presentation. This one is Weirdest Plants on Earth. So I like to go down the rabbit hole sometimes because you'd never know what's down there. And this is one that I thought, there's a lot of really weird plants out there, and wouldn't everybody like to know a little bit more about them? Here in North America, where we are, it's fairly temperate, and we do have some unusual plants. You'll see a few of those out there in this presentation. But in the tropics, woo, there is some really weird stuff. And the adaptations that some of these plants have are just off the wall. As I do research, it's a good way to kind of entertain myself because I get to learn about all these fantastic and wonderful things that plants can do to survive. So, just a couple of housekeeping things. I've gone ahead and muted everybody. So hopefully we won't have any people that are talking in the background. If you have questions that pop up during the course of this presentation, feel free to put them in the chat box. And if there's time at the end, I am happy to answer those. And also, just because I'm curious, we're reaching a wider range in audience now. We're getting a lot of folks from all over the state of Georgia now, and sometimes people from outside the state of Georgia. If you want to share the link with a friend after you've registered, feel free to do so. It is perfectly acceptable to do that. I do like to see where everybody is from. So not a big deal about sharing the link, but if you don't mind just dropping in your location to the chat box. So if you're from Chattanooga, Tennessee, put that in there, and that'll help me kind of get an idea of where our viewership is from. As always, this qualifies for continuing education, or if you're interested in just learning stuff, hey, I'm up for that. You can always catch this after we record, and it goes on our Metro Master Gardener YouTube channel where everything is put for your viewing pleasure after the fact. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So there's not a lot of, really, you know, I guess flowery stuff to say about this. I chose flowers. Um, Other than these are just really weird plants and they have a lot of weird adaptations. So there's no super learning about anything, no environmental message or anything. These are just plants, and we're going to talk about the weird stuff. So the baobab tree. I remember as a child seeing all of these wildlife shows, and a lot of times they would be in Madagascar. So, islands can make a lot of really weird plants and animals because they're isolated. And so, as they're isolated, um, lots of weird things can grow from that. And as you can see here, you've got the baobab tree. This is only one of many, many different species of baobabs, but someday I hope to make it to Madagascar. But they also grow in Africa because Madagascar is off the coast of there, and Australia. So if I don't make it all the way out there, I do have an opportunity at some point, maybe before I die, to go and see them in Australia or in Africa. They're very impressive trees. So they're all going to have this really wide trunk that you see there. Really wide, very tall for the most part, very fat. 20 feet to 100 feet tall. And you see an example right down there. They have very large flowers. You can see a flower. It looks mushroom-like, doesn't it? But they're only open for about 15 hours. So about half of a day, give or take, opening very quickly at dusk. And so if you're curious, you can always find videos of this online, but you can actually see them opening. It's so quick, which is actually pretty interesting. They can store an immense amount of water, up to 32,000 gallons of water. But if you look at a lot of where they are, either on Madagascar or on some of the parts along in Australia and Africa, these are areas that really don't see a lot of rainwater unless you get the monsoon. And the monsoon doesn't always come. So they have to prepare like it's going to be a drought for many, many years. So they're able to suck up a ton of water, 32,000 gallons up to, in order to make it through the dry season. So that's pretty interesting. That trunk will fluctuate in size too, which is different than a lot of different trees that you see around here. Here, they'll grow, you'll have tree rings. They put on additional growth every year, but they don't really change in size when it's dry to when it's wet, unlike these, which is different. So one tree in Zimbabwe was over 2,000 years old, almost 2,500 years old, and had a diameter of 52 feet. And it has been, supposedly, some specimens could live up to 6,000 years. That's a really long time. So you can actually eat the fruit, and they'll it's been used for makeup. You can use that seed oil and cosmetics for moisturizers. I don't have any brands for you, but I'm sure if you did some research, you could probably find it. Fairly fire resistant because remember, some of these places are very arid and they do have brush fires. So a fairly fire resistant bark. And that rope can be used for, or sorry, that bark can be used for rope, sometimes shelters, things like that, and even jails and post offices. So I think if you let me move my little screen up there. So if you look up at the top right corner, that's a jail in a tree. I love it. It's a jail in a tree. You can actually go visit that, by the way. I think there's a person sitting in there. It's roped off. Well, not roped off, but got a fence around it. But it's a jail in a tree. That's so cool. All right. So the next up is the dragon's blood tree. This is very prehistoric looking. So it's in the Socotra Islands, and it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So these are very, very protected. And if you cut one, you can see it actually bleeds red, which is really weird. So this is near Yemen, the country of Yemen. So obviously it's named for the sap because it looks very red. But other interesting things. So they use that sap as a varnish in the 18th century for violins. It can also be used as a traditional medicine. So some of the native folks use that because it does have some wound healing properties. Um, I love learning about medicinal properties of plants. That's how most everything has been discovered. And then science takes that and makes something out of it and, replicates that. But yeah, so really interesting. It's going to look like something you would find in, Jurassic Park because this is kind of, I wanted everybody to see the underside of it. But when you can see some of the background there on the side, left side picture. But yeah, if you see a lot of these, it looks like dinosaurs should be roaming there. Another interesting thing, if you see those branches, that branching only occurs when there's growth from that terminal bud. So for all you the plant folks out there, that apical meristem, or that part of the plant that puts on the growth, so it will only branch at that area and it'll stop if it's eaten or it flowers, which is kind of interesting. So you can actually, instead of counting the rings of it, you count the branches. So this one over here on the left is pretty old. You can see it's branched quite a few times. But yeah, you count the divisions in the branch, whether it goes right or left or whatever. So each tree is going to grow to approximately 30 feet, which isn't very tall, but it lives up to 300 to 600 years. So that's a really long time. And the areas that it grows, again, are fairly arid, but and it's near the coastline. So you're going to get fog and you're going to get a lot of moisture that blows in from the ocean, and it is adapted so that those leaves can actually absorb water. Plants can do that to a certain extent, but this one actually um, is better adapted than most plants because of where it lives. King aspen. this is also a favorite of mine, and this was something that when I learned the biggest factoid about this plant, which is it's one huge colony. I learned this long ago. I mean, if you ever go driving out leaf peeping out west at a certain time of year where you see all these beautiful yellow leaves, like you see in that top left photo, it's beautiful, absolutely gorgeous. But you think all of those are different trees. Well, they're not necessarily. So they're going to be, all over in more temperate areas, not so much down here, but also known as the American aspen or the trembling poplar. It can be in the higher elevations, obviously out west in the mountain areas in North America, Canada to Mexico. Um, so it is the most widely distributed tree species in, it should be more Americas, but central to North America. So all the way from Canada down into Mexico. Of course, the more tropical the area, the more higher elevations you're going to find it in. But it will grow 50 to 60 feet, so really not that impressive tall, but it's got that really white bark with the black um, scarring and patterns in there. So it's very distinct if you're out walking in the woods and you see it. Kind of like a paper bark birch, but not. And what's interesting is that bark can actually photosynthesize. A lot of these areas, like I mentioned, are fairly high in elevation, and so they may not see a lot of daylight in the wintertime, and obviously they're shorter seasons. So that bark will actually photosynthesize sugars in the winter so that that tree can live, which also makes it very attractive to animals like moose or elk or deer that need to feed because those sugars in there make it fun to munch on. So it is attractive to animals that need to feed in the wintertime when there might be too much snow. So as I'd mentioned, the most interesting thing is each is a colonial or it's a colony, and it could be all male, it could be all female. And each of those individual stems might live 50 to 150 years. So that could be a really, really old tree. So um, the oldest living thing on Earth has like 50,000, and this is in Utah, so in the North America, could have 50,000 stems on a single root system, and it's covering over 100 acres. And I'm sure they probably didn't go out and weigh it, but that could be 12 million pounds. Um, that's a lot, a lot of tree. So it's not used necessarily in building because it's a very soft wood, like some other types of not maple, like pine is fairly soft. But it is used in wood pulp or other thing because sometimes when you see these out here, that's like all you see. There aren't very many tree species. It's not very diverse. It's more like a monoculture, meaning that's all you see. It's just like one species. All right. Rainbow eucalyptus. So if you see a picture of this online, you're probably thinking, that's AI. Totally. No, it's not. It's real. I have actually seen a specimen in Hawaii. There is one in a botanical garden. Well, there's actually a couple of them in botanical garden in Oahu. And it's not probably the most spectacular specimen that's out there, but it definitely did have a lot of blues and some greens and oranges and things like that. So, yes, it's real. And the way that that happens is that bark exfoliates all the time. And so there's going to be different layers in there. So the first layer is bright green, and then that inner bark gets exposed over time. You'll see different pigments. And so this particular tree is going to have those anthocyanins, that's blue and purple. You're going to have tannins, which is reddish brown and orange. And then based on temperature changes and light intensity and moisture and age, those peel off and you'll get brilliant colors. So you may have a tree that's growing in one area that has more purples and blues, and then you may have a tree in another area that has more oranges and reds and yellows. So it's very interesting, very cool. Uh, so there is some root inhibition, and that prevents it propagation. So going and thinking you can go sneak into that botanical garden and take a root and propagate that. If the tree's older than 5 years old, which they do grow really quickly, so over 32 feet in like 18 months, but it's a tropical tree. Um, you're not going to be able to propagate it. So don't think that that's going to work. I know there's a lot of people out there that go and they take some like the Christmas cactus, holiday cactus cuttings and spider plants and things like that. It's not going to work here. Can't do that. It will grow in zones in the US, zone 10, so Florida, parts of California, that kind of thing. But it does have, if you look up at the trunk area up there, it does form buttress roots, which there are a couple, mostly tropicals that'll grow like that, but it can cause a lot of damage. So it's not usually chosen to be put into neighborhoods, that kind of thing. It's native to the Philippines, New Guinea, Indonesia, that kind of thing, but has been propagated all sorts of other places. The giant sequoia. So this is on my bucket list. I would love to see the sequoias out in California. So the giant sequoia is native to the western slopes of the Sierra Nevadas, very particular elevation between 5,000 and 7,000 feet above sea level. So the record is 311 feet with a almost 29 foot diameter. And this is the oldest non-clonal organism, meaning it's not a clone, meaning they're not growing out on the root systems, kind of like the aspen that we just talked about. And they really are old. Well, obviously, to get that size, they would have to be. So they live, 3,200 years or longer. And for instance, bristleclones, which also live out west, can live to be more than 4,000 years. When we went out to Colorado many years ago when the kids were little, we found a trail out near Breckenridge, and there was a series of, I don't know, 7 or 8 old bristlecones that were out there. I know that's not what we're talking about here, but some of those they had the friends of this particular group went out and actually made signage and put that at each individual tree along that path so that we could see and read about how old each tree was, and they were named. It was so interesting. And so some parts of them were dead, some of them were alive, but some of these trees were like 2 to 3,000 years old. That's very humbling when you as a human have only been here for less than 100 years, and then you think about this tree and how what it's seen in that lifetime. It's very interesting. So that bark on these may be about 3 foot thick at the base. Out west, a lot of these trees in that particular ecology need fire in order to reproduce properly. So most of those cones that they produce need to be touched by fire or the high temperatures that fire provides so that they can release the seeds so that the next generation can happen. Unfortunately, over time, a lot of the environment out there has been such that they don't want to do prescribed burns because I'm not going to get into that. But that's part of the ecology of out west is that they need those burn periods. Lightning usually is what starts it. But they are allowed to happen naturally, the amount of fuel that is there is not such as what it is when you suppress a fire. And many of these species need fire in order to reproduce, like I mentioned. So it's very important that it's done on a fairly regular basis. And if we want the propagation of these trees naturally, we have to allow that to happen. So another interesting thing, mature tree is only going to produce viable cones about every 20 years. So the first thing that everybody needs to know is the older they live, they're probably not going to produce a lot of offspring. They're probably going to be more endangered. You're not going to see as many of them because they live a lot longer, they reproduce a lot less, and that's both in mammals and the animal kingdom as well as plants. So these trees live a long time, and obviously they don't reproduce every year. As I mentioned, fire is very necessary. So you got to clean out the vegetation underneath there, but there's problems. You get some longhorn beetle damage. And but the good news is also is those seeds can lie dormant for a long, long, long time, even hundreds of years, and still be viable. So the other thing that I found really interesting is that, I know they're protected groves in California, but there are very distinct ecological niches in other places. And so they're actually planting them in other places in the US and in Europe. So they're not going to go extinct, but they are challenged in their own native range. So Cape Sundew. So the next three or so we're going to talk about are carnivorous plants. I've always loved carnivorous plants. Even when I was a little kid, you'd go into the store and sometimes you'd see the little containers there and they would be selling like a Venus flytrap. I don't know how many of those poor things I killed, but a lot of them until I got older and wiser and said, I need to do a little research on these guys to make sure that I'm actually taking care of them and that they'll survive. So just like, you had a pet that was maybe a disposable pet, like a hamster or something, these little guys sometimes end up being disposable plants because people don't know how to properly take care of them. So this is a perennial. It is a carnivorous plant in the Cape Sundew, and it's native to southern Africa. So it doesn't grow very big, 5 to 6 inches. But as all carnivorous plants, they don't typically grow in very nutrient-rich habitats. So I have one, I've got a little terrarium over here that I have a Cape Sundew, I have a couple of pitcher plants, and I have a Venus flytrap. And the biggest thing that I can tell you if you want to propagate or keep these inside is you've got to have distilled water or rainwater. You want to have a rain barrel and catch your own rainwater. You cannot use water out of the tap. They don't like the minerals and they definitely don't like the chlorine. You will kill them. So be very careful about that. You don't put fertilizer on them. They don't get the minerals and the other nutrients that they need through fertilizer. They get it because they're carnivorous. They're eating bugs and other things. So you see here all that little mucilage on there, the little droplets, that's what's going to be very sticky. And so small fruit flies or other flies or spiders or fire ants, you can put those on there and help them out, but you can get food that is made for these. It comes in little gelatinous clumps or liquid if you have a pitcher plant, and you can actually put that on there, and the plant can get the same nutrients that it would if you put a fire ant or some other insect on there. So for this particular one, Cape Sundews, it can take only like 5 to 10 seconds for their branches, if you will, the tentacles, to kind of collapse over its prey. So very quick, whereas some of them it can take like 30 minutes. So interestingly enough, the leaves also kind of follow a circadian rhythm. So they're kind of going to fold inward. Sensitive plants also do that. Mimosas also do that. They'll kind of close in on themselves at dusk and then they reopen at dawn. And along its margin, it's going to have, if you want to propagate these, they're going to have these little gemmae that break off and they'll root themselves. So if you have them in a terrarium and it's very favorable, they will grow. And another thing that carnivorous plants can do, it can distinguish between living stuff and debris. So if you toss a spider in there, it'll know that's a spider. But if you toss a piece of, yeah, I don't know, bark or something, it knows that's bark. Pretty smart, huh? All right, Venus flytrap. So I thought this was interesting. There's only one species of Venus flytrap, one native species, and it's native to only one place on Earth, and that is a very small region of North America in the area around North and South Carolina. But There are over 500 registered cultivars, meaning people have taken this and they've bred it, and now there's all sorts of different cool ones. There's big ones, there's small ones, there's colored ones, all sorts of different stuff. So that's what the nursery industry does. Um, the other interesting stuff, their fly traps won't close unless two trigger hairs are touched within 20 seconds. So kind of mimicking a bug that crosses across there. So if only one hair is triggered, it's just going to say it's a false alarm and it won't close. So if you're going to do that and you're going to feed it, then make sure you're triggering two hairs. It will only digest live prey. So if it closes on something like a leaf or a dead bug, it'll reopen after about 10 days and it's not going to do anything with that. So if you put a dead bug in there, it may not actually digest that. They actually use electricity. They use an electrical impulse. That's how it closes, which is interesting. So yes, plants do have potential energy, and they use those action potentials, kind of like we have neurons, to close. Pretty cool, huh? They can remember. So if it knows one hair was touched, it's waiting for that second hair to touch. So kind of a primitive decision making. So maybe smarter than we thought. They can digest meat, although that isn't its preferred food. Some of these larger ones, actually, if it catches a small bird or a small rodent or something like that, it can digest that, but it does prefer insects. And as an adaptation to not harm pollinators, all of these carnivorous plants, and this one, the previous, and then the one after this, all the flowers actually will grow on singular stalks that are way above the traps. And that's because they want to preserve those pollinators. They don't want to catch them. That's smart because they don't want to eat what's trying to replicate itself. So it leaves them alone. And as I mentioned, you want to be really careful about the kind of water you use. All right, pitcher plant. I love these, and these of the three are probably one of the easier ones to keep alive. Um, there are some on pretty much every continent except Antarctica. So where there's only one Venus flytrap, there are tons, over 600 species all over the world except for Antarctica. A little too cold there. So you can even get, I mean, I have some growing in a pot on my deck, and they're perfectly happy. They do really well. I have some tropical ones that are in my little terrarium, and they're beautiful. There are some dealers that are around the Atlanta area. You can also get them online. There's Facebook pages where people sell carnivorous plants. So many different cultivars out there. It's crazy. I mean, you can get some really cool looking ones, but they evolved from that carnivorous ability independently across different plant lines. So, if you ever want to think about guided evolution, it's very interesting that they all, even on different continents, figured out how to do that. So, some of them may produce heat to attract insects, and that digestive fluid can be 1,000 times more acidic than rainwater. So I was going to get a picture of a toilet and put it on here, but some of them use that feces from little uh, bats and tree shrews, which are very, very small. It may use the feces of those two species for food, which is kind of funny because they look a little bit like a toilet. But it would have been funnier if I'd done that, but I didn't get around to it. Anyway, and there are some larger species that can reach up to 2 feet wide, which that's a pretty big picture. So, and also as with many others, they can mimic a smell of rotting flesh to attract scavengers. So some of those beetles and other things like that that prefer that, that's how they attract them in. And sometimes they're the water that's in there. It may smell sugary, but it doesn't actually have any nutritional value. So the chemicals are produced in order to lure in those insects. So very smart. Strangler fig. So um, They grow, you see them pretty much every tropical area, and they will start to grow around the tree, and you can see some examples of there. These are called hemiepiphytes, and they use that tree. Their seed from the fruit lands at the base of just another tree. It doesn't really matter which one, and it uses that tree as a ladder, essentially. So that's why they're called strangler figs, and there's ficus species. So the ficus that you have growing in your house, it's within that ficus. Not all of them are strangler figs, but yeah. So they're just kind of using that as a ladder to get up to the light, and birds are going to eat that fruit, and then they drop their seeds. Those seeds can grow just about anywhere, so it could land on a branch. And if there's a little bit of moisture there, it could use that, and then its roots will grow down as well as growing up. And eventually, when it reaches the ground, it will grow in and encircle the host. It does photosynthesize, and it's not a parasite. It's just using that poor tree to get where it needs to go. And unfortunately, it will grow all the way around and surround that tree, kind of like wisteria or kudzu will, I guess. So that's our version of a strangler fig, but it will kill the host species. And when you look at this, doesn't it remind you of the face huggers in Alien? I just kept looking at this picture and I thought, like I said, I go down the rabbit hole, but it's really interesting. It does look like that, doesn't it? Um, so anyway, also just like some other of the Western figs, not strangler figs, but Western figs, it does rely on a fig wasp to pollinate its flowers. It'll crawl in. You can see the life cycle there. So again, not every fig is going to use a wasp. Some of them are self-fruitful. The ones that we have here, that's what it is. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. So the bat flower, and it does look a little bit like a bat. It's kind of a creepy looking flower. It's got like whiskers. So these are found in Thailand and Malaysia, Southern Asia, and Australia. So over there in Oceania area. Often looks like an orchid, and it can be confused as that, but it's actually in the yam family, which is weird. So it's using an kind of an imposter look. It's sapromyophylle, which means it's going to lure carrion flies. Smells like dead stuff. There's a lot of plants in here that smell like dead stuff, and it's going to attract beetles and it's going to attract flies. So carrion type insects. Don't eat it because it can cause a lot of sickness. I don't know why you would want to eat it when it smells like dead stuff, but I don't know. Somebody might. But the starchy rhizome, that is used as a food source in medicine in parts of Asia. So don't eat the flower, but I guess you can eat the root. The bujum tree. So it's named for Lewis Carroll's poem, The Hunting of the Snark, just for, grins and giggles if you play trivia. And look at it, it looks like something out of uh, like a cat in a hat type situation. And who knows, maybe that also was like an inspiration for that. It's native to Baja California and the peninsula area. Tiffany, if you could please, yeah, thank you. Um, just as an aside, I tried to turn off that function. If you're on a mobile phone, sometimes when you use your fingers, if you're holding it, that can actually turn on some of those functions where you're drawing on the screen. So please try to refrain from that. So this trunk can be used as a water reservoir, and it can hold in a lot of water, kind of like the baobab tree, because the area that it grows in the Baja Sonoran Desert area can only sometimes it only gets like 2 to 5 inches of rain a year, which is not a lot. So it's got to suck up everything that it can get and hold it in there. And it's smart, and it's just like a lot of trees here in some of the more tropical areas, is if you have a monsoon season, those leaves are very costly to a tree. You can lose a lot of moisture from them. So sometimes you'll find, and cherry trees do that a lot here. They if they need here in Georgia, they'll put their leaves out in the spring, they're deciduous, and then about mid-July, mid to end of July, they've actually gotten enough nutrients, photosynthesized enough nutrients to store for the next cycle. And so sometimes you'll see if they're a little under stress, they'll drop some of their leaves early. And we get a lot of calls on that. People call and they're worried that their trees are losing their leaves. If it's after mid-July, I generally tell people don't worry too much if they're dropping their leaves. That can be normal. Sometimes they'll hold on to them a little longer if it's nice and wet and they're doing okay. Moisture wise, then they may keep them a little longer, but trees have that function. And so, also, wild boojum are very, very protected. So if if you see one on Craigslist, it can cost like $1,000 per square foot of canopy. So the one in the top left, um, canopy being relative, but that's a fairly old and big one. That would be a really expensive tree. I mean, it could be like 20 or 30 or 40,000. So, the interesting part about these, bees will pry open the flowers. You see some of those flowers there, uh, by brute force, which is interesting. All right, the corpse flower. I know everybody was kind of waiting for that. So this can grow up to 10 feet tall. I don't know if I've never seen one bloom in person. They're in a lot of botanical gardens in a greenhouse situation, and they're a really big attraction when they're about ready to bloom. So people will drive from hours away to come see them. And it's got the world's largest unbranched inflorescence for basically the flower structure. It's not petals, but you see that uh, fleshy material around there. It's called a spathe. That can reach about 6 feet in diameter, so like the length of a human. So very big, like one of the largest flowering structures on the earth. The flowers don't last long, 24 to 40 hours. So if you want to see it, you better get over there. And they can generally, they'll post it on the website as like when they think it's going to bloom. It can take up to 10 years, so very slow grower again, and it may only bloom every few years. Another interesting thing, they have the ability to heat up. So it could, some of these species can actually heat up to 98 degrees, so basically body temperature. And what that does is that enhances that odor, that stinky, nasty carrion odor, that will attract in those pollinators, so those beetles and flies and things like that, because heat, just like when you put perfume on or cologne, it will magnify that scent. And so there's a variety of different genuses. I won't go through all of those. There's, different ones, of course, all the way through stinkhorn. So very interesting. Creosote. So you might be thinking it's just a bush that grows out west where it's really dry. Yes, it does. Also known as greasewood or chaparral. And you're going to find this in the southwest deserts in the Americas, all the way down into Mexico. So the Mojave, Sonoran deserts, Chihuahuan deserts, that kind of thing. So not very impressive. I mean, 3 to 10 feet tall. It's going to have those little yellow flowers. And after a rain, very drought tolerant. These things can survive on 3 inches of rain a year. That's not much. I mean, sometimes when it rains here, we get 3 inches in like 30 minutes. So think about that. So most animals are not going to browse on this particular bush, creosote, because obviously that's the stuff that like coats your chimney and you have to have it cleaned out. The king clone creosote rings, so these grow in their clones through the root system, just like those aspens that I had earlier in there. The king clone creosote ring in the Mojave is dating 11,700 years old, and it's almost 70 foot in diameter. So yeah, they grow very slowly, but yeah, that's really old. Almost 12,000 years old are these plants. They're allelopathic chemicals, so same thing like in a black walnut, so that stuff doesn't grow around its root system. Same thing here. These plants will put out allelopathic chemicals. And the roots are super, super efficient. So they will suck up literally all the water that's present, that if they drop seed, there's not enough sometimes for the seed to germinate. So, hey, but when you only live in some place where you might get a couple inches of rain a year, you got to do what you got to do, right? The squirting cucumber. I like this one. So I added a little video up there. So the squirting cucumber is native to Southern Europe, Northwest Africa, and Southwest Asia, but it has naturalized in a lot of different areas. So these are going to be little perennial vines, and you're going to get these little cucumber looking fruits that develop. And when they're ready, this is how they spread their seed. Very efficient. They have a turgor pressure in there, and when it's ready to go, it will stiffen that stem, it'll pop loose, and then it's just sprays out those seeds at like 45 miles an hour, which can go as far as like 30 feet. So, if you're a fast growing little plant and you want to get your progeny as far away from the rest of them as possible, you're going to spray your seeds like 33 feet. So, what I thought was kind of interesting is if you think about the pressure involved in that, we are here at about, well, I'm not at sea level, but if you're at sea level, like you're down in Florida, you're at 1 atmosphere. So, the pressure on these guys when they're getting ready to pop and spray, 27 atmospheres. That's a lot. That's really cool. So, then, they'll spray out, and then that's probably how they get kind of invasive in some areas. But still interesting nonetheless. All right, the lobster claw plant, mostly just because it's really cool, the heliconia. So they're going to grow in more tropical zones. So you see them in Florida, zones 10 to 13. They're in Hawaii. They're, down into Mexico. Can tolerate temperatures as low as 60, but not for very long. Mostly this is just, it looks cool. Yeah. I mean, it looks a little bit like a lobster claw, and it will propagate through underground rhizomes. Sometimes you can see these for sale as a house plant, but generally speaking, not one. It's mostly in botanical gardens and that kind of thing. So this is mostly just cool because of how it looks. The tree tumbo. So I know it doesn't look like much, but it's going to be in Namibia, so in West Africa and Angola. And it's in very, very, very arid areas. And it really only will have like two permanent leaves. And it can grow big, it can grow like 10 feet wide. And it can live, on average, probably 500 to 600 years, but up to 2,000 years. So this is another very long-lived plant. Um, so seeds are only going to germinate in very heavy rain, which doesn't happen very often. So there aren't many of them, but those seeds are just super hardy. So I mean, a lot of times you look at a desert and it's really, really hot there. So they can live and survive in temperatures that up to 176 degrees, which is really hot, and down to -4 because desert habitats can fluctuate a lot. And so shortly after germination, remember the apical meristem, that's the main growth part of the plant. That's going to die, and then those two leaves will just continue to slowly grow over time. You might see some flower stalks in there, not necessarily considered endangered, but protected. Um, but protected because they're growing in areas with landmines. So, yeah, there is that. Living stone or lithops. I have some of these. I have them actually behind me. There's a few of them. Um, so these you thrive on neglect. You want to put them in a desert substrate, mostly little gravel, and don't overwater them. They're beautiful. I mean, these are what the pictures, not mine, don't look at mine too much. But they grow in very arid regions in southern Africa. Um, they look like little pebbles, very colorful little pebbles. And so, what I thought was kind of interesting was that even experienced botanists might overlook them in the wild because their camouflage is so good. And they can live up to 50 years. Now, In most people's houses here, not so much because people generally overwater them. They just rot. When I got these, the lady that I got them from told me, she goes, "You only need to water these a couple times a year." And I said, "You're kidding." And she goes, "No, I'm not kidding." She said, "Don't overwater them, they'll rot." So I have done that and they have continued to live, which is good. Plants in my house thrive on neglect sometimes because I'm not around a lot. So most of the leaves are going to be buried beneath the soil surface. And you can see a cross section there in the bottom picture. And that's kind of like a leaf window. So that area can be kind of transparent, let light through. So there are a few species that can tolerate up to 20 inches of rain, which, we get about 50 to 60 inches of rain here a year. So obviously they wouldn't do well here. But most of them are going to thrive on almost no precipitation. They can just that's it. So just lightly misting them, and they're perfectly happy that way. Um, so, and you can get these, you can get them anywhere. They're easy to transport. So you can get a variety of really cool looking ones on Amazon even. I've seen them for sale on Etsy has lots of them. But they're really cool. They're very neat looking little plants. Jackfruit. You can actually buy this in Walmarts around here. So if you go to some of the Walmarts and areas where you have a lot of island folks that have moved over here, you're going to see jackfruit for sale. So I actually bought some because I was curious. Well, and I wanted my kids to try it. And so it's an evergreen member of the fig family, but it doesn't taste like figs. So you're going to find them in India, Southeast Asia, and Oceania, that area down there. Although they have, since you can get them in the Caribbean, that kind of thing. They are the largest tree fruit in the world. They're huge. I think the one that I bought a half of one, and it was like this big. So it's really big. Um, Up to 120 pounds per fruit. And you can see some examples in that top right picture because that fruit is just gargantuan. And if you get a mature tree, it can have up to 200 to 500 fruits. So, and then you can see below, that's how you break it open and the fruit, and it looks like it's a little bit like asparagus. So some people like asparagus, some people, and they smell that like garlicky smell. Same thing with cilantro. Some people it tastes like soap, some people like it. In this case, sometimes it tastes like a sweet pineapple or banana flavor, and sometimes it doesn't. I'm one of those doesn't. It does not taste like pineapple or banana. So we tried it, and I think the chickens got the rest of it. Sorry. But it can be also mistaken for durian fruit. And durian has a really nasty smell. It smells a little bit like sewage and sweaty socks. I have never smelled it. I choose not to. Chocolate vine. This actually grows around here and it can be somewhat invasive. It'll grow in zones 5 to 9. So if you see it or if somebody says, "Hey, do you want some chocolate vine?" Just beware, it can get a little out of control. So that vine can grow up to 30 feet and it'll have these kind of really pretty somewhat chocolate scented flowers. And then you get the fruits that look like this, the little purple fruits. So the pulp can be kind of a cross between if you know what a lychee fruit tastes like and a dragon fruit. Dragon fruit doesn't a night blooming cereus. It doesn't have a lot of flavor. It's kind of just very interesting looking, but yeah, it's definitely if you can grow that. And the seeds, don't eat those. It can cause some irritation. Um, you do need two plants. So if your neighbor has one and you have one, two separate plants, you might be able to get some fruit. Daughter. This one is really cool. So I've seen this in Gwinnett County. I had a guy that contacted me and said that he had this really weird plant growing out in his power line right of way. So I went out to take a look, and sure enough, it's dodder. So dodder lacks chlorophyll. It's this orangey color. It's an obligate holoparasite, meaning it needs that host's water, minerals, organic nutrients. And it actually will, with these Hostoria attachments, it actually grows into its host and it will use its host's water, minerals, nutrients, that kind of stuff. And it's smart. It uses chemical cues to figure out where it's going to attach. So if you have, in this case, we suspect that because they were clearing out the power line, that they got some on the machinery and then pieces of it dropped and, it found its way basically. So, seedlings, they sniff out potential hosts based on organic compounds that are released. It has 5 to 10 days to find a host. If it doesn't, it'll die. It doesn't have enough reserves for that. But once it does, if it finds one, it will sink in that Hostoria into the tissues and it will start sucking the nutrients out. It's like a plant vampire. So, really cool, but kind of creepy. It can bring diseases. It can be a vector for plant viruses. So, yeah, it can transmit them and it will grow towards seedlings that it prefers, which is interesting. So, like tomatoes, it likes tomatoes for some reason. I'm going to try to speed along here. Jackal food. This one is really creepy looking and found in South Africa and parts of Namibia. It just kind of pops up out of the soil. It's an obligate root holoparasite, meaning it's got to tap into the root system, doesn't have any chlorophyll, can't photosynthesize, and so it too has the Hastoria that taps into the roots of the host for nutrients. That flower smells like rotting feces, and that's to lure in beetles for pollination. So obviously, that's a lot of different plants that use that mechanism. And you're going to have underground fruit that kind of ripens. And it can take, there can be like 200 or 20,000 seeds in there. So people can actually eat those. I don't know if I would want to because it looks like this. Does anybody watch Stranger Things? When I saw this picture, this is the first thing I thought of in the upside down. This is what it looks to me. Just creepy. Yeah, some of this stuff is really creepy. Okay, so the Western Australian Christmas tree. So it looks like a pretty plant, right? It blooms around Christmas. That's why it's got that name, Western Australian Christmas tree. So it is in the southern mistletoe family. Who knew it was in mistletoe? It's one of the only a tree that's really in mistletoe. It's a hemiparasitic tree, so it's a root parasite, and it's weird. So if you look at that top right picture, those little white bands, they look like grubs. They're not. That's the plant. That their roots will grow and out and about, and when they encounter the root of another plant, and sometimes even their own, they will form these little hostoria. So much like some of the other plants that I've talked about, these little white rings form around that root, and you can kind of see a cross section there, and it grows into the other root and it just starts sucking out the good stuff. It's got a little blade in there even that just cuts into. I mean, that is creepy. Who knew, right? But it's like a hydraulically operated blade. So it's using the pressure in there, the turgor pressure in the root system to cut into it. And it'll grow into anything. It'll grasses, sedges, weeds, vines, eucalyptus, fallen twigs that are dead. And it can attach its own roots. So, but yeah, very interesting. The ghost plant. We have these. I actually have some in my property up in North Georgia. This is a mycoheterotroph, so don't feel like you need to know these names. It's parasitic but non-photosynthesizing. If you'll note, it has no chlorophyll. They're white, hence the name ghost plant. A perennial native plant, and it can be found in temperate areas. So, temperate parts of Asia, temperate parts of North America, temperate parts of northern South America up at elevation. And it's going to have a relationship with the fungi. So, here we have like mycorrhiza, and it's kind of like that. So, that helps actually promote nutrients. So it acts as mycorrhiza actually acts as a conduit for extra nutrients to pass through to the roots of the plant. In this case, it's like, hey, let's use this to get nutrients for ourselves. So it's a parasite from the fungi. It doesn't photosynthesize, so it's getting everything from that, and it's just a parasite. So It's got the hosts are on this the Rosaculaceae family, and without getting too into it, just kind of looking here to see if there's anything extra interesting about these. Some of the orchids, non-photosynthetic orchids, gentians, and some liverworts. So if you've got liverworts and some ferns, club mosses, we do have club moss here, and it's that is also one that's very colonial in nature. So if you see a patch of club moss, that's actually like all one living organism. The resurrection plant or the rose of Jericho. So you can buy these and they can be completely dead looking, but then you put them in water and boom, you get what you see here down at the bottom. And there's an example of what it looks like when you get it and you put water with it, and then it unfurls and it looks green and happy and beautiful. So you can find these in the Chihuahuan Desert, northern Mexico, southwestern US, parts of Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and it can survive for without water for 50 years. It's in the spike moss family. And it can lose up to 95% of the water that it has, which and just remain dormant. So it's going into like a torpor type state, what would be the equivalent for uh, an animal. It takes about 24 to 48 hours once it's back with water to kind of rehydrate. And you can buy these. It's a sporophyte, so it will actually reproduce with spores rather than seeds, but it can be propagated with rhizomes. So there is that. Um, Again, a lot of these are really important to the indigenous peoples that are there. They thought it possessed healing properties because it's the resurrection plant. But yeah, and just as an aside, if you go out, if you do find some club moss, and it's lots of places around here, sometimes you'll find it with granite outcroppings. Look at the leaf structure on that and compare it to this. It's very similar. We did the Andes. Yeah, I'm running a little late. If you need to go, I understand, but if you're fascinated, I will try to kind of zoom through these. There is no conclusion, so we'll just kind of go. So this is going to be the largest species of bromeliad in the world. Its trunk can be 13 up, well, actually taller than 13 feet, but that inflorescence or that flower, that's the tall part. So that can be up to 50 feet. And here's what a giraffe looks like. So you have a man next to the giraffe, and then you have the flowers, the inflorescence or the spike, and you can see how much taller it is than a giraffe. So it's huge. Each plant can produce over 8,000 flowers. Think about all the pollinators that services in some of these really arid areas. So it grows in the Andes in Bolivia and Peru, and it can be between it grows about elevations at like 15,000 feet. That's high. I mean, you probably have an altitude sickness if you're that high, but usually you'll find it like 7,900 to 13 or 14,000, which again, pretty high. Um, its life cycle 80 to 100 years, and it practices semiparity, which means that it reproduces once and then it dies. So some other examples I put in here just so that you would remember it would be like Pacific salmon. They spawn, they die. Cicadas, they spawn, they die. Mayflies, tons of those. They spawn, they die. Some species of squid and octopus, and some spiders. I'm sure some people are happy about the spiders that die. Another word for this in the plant world, monocarpic. And because they have such a huge inflorescence with so many flowers, they produce a ton of habitat and food for birds and bugs and everything else. So they're very important to their habitat. And unfortunately, they are listed as endangered, mostly due to the fact that they are so high, they can only live in a very small range, elevation range, and they're very isolated populations. So much like you would see in a island population where they're isolated, so too here do you see that. And that's it. So I was only 2 minutes over. Um, I threw this one to, whoops, went too far. All right, so let's see. I'm trying to get these, there we go, the chat to pop up if there are any interesting questions here. And just again, as an aside, I love to see where people are from. So if you want to share where you're from, just put your city and state in there. And I love to see where folks are from and that we're reaching a farther audience even outside of Georgia, which is great because learning is cool and you never want to stop learning. So I like doing these because, that sends me down the rabbit hole and I can learn all these cool things. Like, who knew that there's a little hydraulic blade in this ring thing that, this plant can then parasitize the other plant and suck up all its moisture? I mean, that's pretty neat. I mean, you got to like learning, right? All right, so let's see. Oh, Ohio. Nice. Got a lot of people from all over Georgia. That's great. Oh, I've been to the tree in Zimbabwe. Takes many, not yet. Oh, the prison tree. Yes, it's on my bucket list. Um, Chocolate Vine at Vines Park in Loganville. Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, I might have to check that out. Lots of dot. Yes, there is a lot of Dodder on the Blue Ridge Parkway. Um, and you can see it. It's bright orange yellow color. So you're driving along, everything's nice and green, and you hit this big patch of orange. So it's interesting. If you are interested in that kind of stuff, I encourage you to stop and actually get out and take a sample and look at it. And you can actually pull some of those little Historias out, and you can see where it attaches into its host, and sucks up all of its nutrients. It's actually pretty cool. All right. Okay. Nice. Well, wonderful. So I don't have any questions. I'm probably thinking a lot of you didn't know a lot about this. Now, this is not an exhaustive list of plants by any stretch of the means. There are so many other really weird and unusual plants out there. These are probably the ones that, like, the most research has been done on. So I'm hoping full that everybody learned something interesting and new today and became a little bit more fascinated with nature. And you're encouraged to go out and check out some of these cool things. A lot of the botanical gardens around the country have some of these plants, and so you can go check those out if you can't travel or you really don't want to travel. You can check some of them out there. Lots of good stuff. But if you want to check out this, of course, was recorded. Oh, I have a question. Let's see. How often can you water the resurrection plant if you want to keep it green? That I'm not sure. So I didn't do a super deep dive into all of this. There is quite a bit of research that's done out there. I always take the sources and put them into the notes section. So, I would encourage you to maybe go out there because it's one that you can buy pretty regularly, since it's pretty cool and easy to grow. So you can probably find, just like I did, some sources for where you can purchase it, and then also the care of the plant itself. The ones that look like little rocks are fascinating. Yes, they are. So you can hit a lot of these plant shows and the lithups, and you can get those there. You can order them off Etsy. You can order them off Amazon, and you get a variety like what you see there. All sorts of different colors. Again, you don't need to water them very much. They need to be in a desert type of soil. What fun. Okay, let's see. Would you be able to make it? Might be able to make it in the North Georgia mountains. Oh, like which one of these plants would be able to, like zone 7A or B? Um, there weren't very many of them that would do well in zone 7. I think there were only a couple. Almost everything is tropical. Unless you're growing it inside in a greenhouse or in a house and making sure that you're careful about humidity levels and that kind of thing, it's going to be very difficult. With the exception of like some of those pitcher plants, which do grow outside and are perfectly happy in some temperate areas. Uh, you know, I would say if you're interested to maybe do a little bit of a deeper dive into some of that information about those particular plants. But like I said, I have some of those carnivorous pitcher plants and some other stuff that grows in a pot out on my deck, and it's perfectly happy. It just does its thing, and that one has to feed itself. I don't feed it plant food. Here, the one inside, I have some carnivorous plant food that I feed. So, okay. Well, thank you all for attending. If you want to check out the coming up next classes, we've got the QR code on the left that'll take you to the classes and educate or events tab. Coming up, we've got 3 workshops that we'll be having. I think they'll be coming up, be getting listed fairly soon. We'll have a viticulture specialist from UGA in early December coming out to Vines Park in Gwinnett County to teach anyone and everyone, you don't have to be in Gwinnett County, how to rehabilitate an older vine and then how to train a new vine. And we'll have this one's interesting, reptiles and amphibians in late December, December 30th. It's a lunch and learn. These are all during the daytime. And that one's going to be at our office in Lawrenceville. We're going to do the top 10 reptiles and amphibians in care, easiest to hardest. So if you thought about having a reptile, because it's not all about plants, it's about natural resources. And that one is actually going to have my daughter, who is in herpetology, really enjoys that kind of thing. She's going to do a presentation, and we have a guest, Frank Bird, who is a herpetologist also, and we'll have a ton of different animals there so people can see them. And then in January, early January, we will have a workshop at Gwinnett Technical College where we'll have the floral design expert come and host a class for, I believe, up to 20 people. And you will learn all the really good stuff about floral design and the principles behind it. You'll learn how and make a cool take-home design that you get to keep. And there's a small fee associated with that. But yeah, we're trying to add in some additional stuff, some new workshops, lunch and learns, things that'll kind of keep you, on the edge of education, which is always fun. So if you like that kind of stuff, keep coming back for more. All right, well, that's about it. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, and everybody go enjoy your evening. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it.